Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to the Learn on Demand Systems Did You Know series of webinars. Today, our topic is tips and tricks for replicating lab content using Save As. My name is Brian Bork, and I am here with our readiness team, and we have some staff standing by to be able to answer any questions that you might have as we go along. If you have any questions, please type them into the questions area of the GoToWebinar session, and we will attempt to answer them via type, or we'll save them to the end. I'll read them back, and then I'll try to answer them as best I can. So I want to first let everyone know what the topic here is, and then we're going to talk a little bit about a brand new feature that we have that allows us to use Save As for an entire series of lab content rather than just doing one piece at a time. So what are we really talking about when we talk about Save As? Well, it's just like when you're inside of Word or Excel, where instead of saving the current document as it stands, you're going to save as, and then you're going to put that content in under typically a different name in a different location or something like that. And then you save that content, and then that becomes a copy in most cases. We are going to talk about three different Save As features. We're going to talk about virtual machine profile Save As, which allows you to save VMs or virtual machines to be used by other labs. Now, that might be other lab profiles, or it might be a backup, if you will, just so that you can go back to it, a point in time copy. Virtual machine profiles, and I want to be very clear about this, do not typically need a Save As or a copy made of them, because whenever you use a virtual machine profile inside of a new lab profile, that virtual machine profile is now forked or branched. It's now on its own, and it's separate from the original where it was first made. So if you make changes to a virtual machine in one lab profile, and that same virtual machine profile is used, it will get those changes. But if you actually use Save As, you can make it so that it's a separate copy. So I want to be clear, you don't need to use Save As if you're reusing content inside of a new lab profile. Save As is just to make a copy of the virtual machine profile, and you'll see how that works in just a little bit. Moving on to the second of the three, lab profiles, and we're going to have a separate slide about lab profiles because there are some options there. It is used to make copies of lab profiles to put in other lab series. Now, when you do a Save As on a lab profile, it also impacts the virtual machine profiles. All right. So essentially, we start at our base level, which is the virtual machine profile, but a lab profile, if it contains virtual machine profiles, will also make copies of or replace the content of the virtual machine profiles if they are linked together. The primary utilization of doing Save As is to essentially relocate content from one place to another, either to use as the beginning for a new sort of a template, if you will, although we do have our template gallery. It is a template that you can use to get started on a brand new lab profile, or once a lab profile is complete and you want to get it published, you will typically use Save As to make a lab profile, a new lab profile available in a production area. So it is sometimes used for creating, and it's sometimes used for moving from development to production. Then our third feature, and this is brand new, is using Save As in a lab series. This is used to make copies of all lab content. So once again, now we're taking a series which contains lab profiles and virtual machine profiles. And by the way, we're talking about all these different profiles. This also includes if you're using cloud content or if you're using containers or hosted virtualization out in AWS or Azure. All of that content gets relocated in both lab series and lab profiles. Okay, but being able to take an entire lab series, so let's say you've got lab 1, lab 2, lab 3, each one of those is a separate lab profile, each with different virtual machine profiles. You can, in one action, choose which of the content is going to be copied over and make a copy of your lab profile. This is almost always used for development to production copies, but it can be used for some other purposes. It replaces the concept of export and import. The export and import are deprecated tools. They are primarily going to be used in the future as more of an archiving solution, as opposed to actually relocating your content or renaming your content like a save as can do. Okay. So those are the 3 save as features: virtual machine profiles, lab profiles, and lab series. Now, of these 3, lab profiles has a sort of the most features within the save as. When you do save as in a virtual machine profile, it just simply makes a copy. If you do a save as in a lab series, it also makes a copy, but you get to pick and choose what is going to be copied over. When you do lab profile save as, you get a slightly different approach. And we'll show you how it looks a little bit different. It's a separate button and so on. There are 3 lab profile options: clone, reuse, and inherit. Now, these save as options are used all the time by all sorts of lab developers out there. And we want to talk a little bit more about each of these lab profile save as options before we talk about some of the scenarios and actually get into the demos. Cloning or making a copy is what is typically used, so therefore it is our default selection. So when you go to save as, its starting setting is to clone. Now what that will do is it will take the virtual machine profiles that are within a lab profile, and it will make a copy of them that is now a branch or a fork. Therefore, this new lab profile is going to be completely separate from the originating lab profile. So clone makes a clone or a copy. Reuse is a very special use case. Reuse takes the content as it is exactly and shares it between 2 lab profiles. So you're using the exact same VM profile inside of the lab. So if you launch the originating lab and you make a change to the VM, let's say you, you install some Windows updates or some software updates, and then you save and commit those changes and create a differencing disk. The copied or the save as version of the lab profile, or the save, we'll call it the saved version, not the originating version, will also, when you launch it, have those changes because you're reusing the content between the 2. Likewise, if you make changes to the save as version, the originating version is going to change. So reuse is using the exact same content, no matter what it is, between the 2 same lab profiles. And again, very special use case, and not always not always appropriate. But if you have an example, for an example, a set of lab profiles, each one has a different set of instructions, but they all use the same virtual machine, and you need to update that virtual machine in order for it to apply certain updates, or you need to have different lab profile or different lab files on the virtual machine. So you make a change to one of those, And let's say these 3 lab profiles will all get those changes to the virtual machine profile. Now that can be really beneficial. However, there are potentially different situations that you could use, and that's where inherit comes in. Now, in most cases, you're going to use clone. Very occasionally, you're going to use reuse, and the second most popular or second most used is inherit. Now, inherit takes the content from the originating lab profile, and that originating lab profile becomes a parent lab profile. And then when you do save as, you're creating a child lab profile. Now, if we make an edit to the parent, the child gets it. But if we try to make a change to the child, it will not go through that way. It won't allow you to save the changes on the child. You only ever make the changes on the parent, and then all of the children will get those changes. Now, this is another situation where you could make a single update and update lots of lab profiles, because you can have more children than just one child, right? You can have as many different lab profiles using that parent lab profile. So those lab profiles save as options, and you'll get to see all of these in action. Well, you'll get to see them all. We won't show them all, each one of them to you in action, but we'll talk about that. So some scenarios for save as. Some copying a gold set of lab profiles to a new lab series as a template. So you can take a set of lab profiles that are already complete inside of a lab series, and then you can use that as a template for future lab series. Now remember, we have the template gallery, and a template gallery is great. I don't want to try to take away from it, but at the current time, it only works for single lab profiles. With this, you could take an entire lab series worth of content and make a template out of it by doing a save as on the lab series. Once you have a lab series in place in, say, a production environment, and you have a couple of lab profiles there, and you want to add a lab profile there, the easiest way to do that is by using save as. That will allow you to make a copy from development and place it into the production environment. Remember, this is only with already existing lab series. If you want to create a backup copy of a virtual machine profile, and I call this a point in time copy. Now, remember, there's no obligation for you to make a copy of a virtual machine profile. That virtual machine profile in that lab profile will stay exactly as it is unless you go in and change it. But it will only change that virtual machine profile inside of that lab profile. So if you have a separate copy out there, it's sort of like an archive or a backup, whatever you want to refer to it. It is just sort of out there for your sense of security. It is not a requirement in order to operate. You don't manually need to make a copy of a lab profile if you make a link it into multiple lab profiles. One thing that inheritance gives you is the easy ability of being able to take a development lab and have that be the parent lab, and then you can have a child lab in the production environment, which is then published out. You don't have to do anything other than set up that inheritance, and that way, if you make a change to the development environment, upon next launch, the people that are using that published lab profile that's out in production, they will get the changes that you have made on the next launch. So those are just some of the scenarios. This is by no means a comprehensive list of when you would use which of these saved as options. These are just some of the options that are out there. So enough with the slides. Let's take a look at these features. So I am going to go ahead and switch out from my slideshow, and I'm going to bring you in to our lab development interface. Now, this is as a standard lab developer. This is not as a super user or anything like that. We are in our lab on demand environment, and inside of our lab on demand environment, we're going to start with the virtual machine profile. Now, this is the lowest unit of all of our profiles. Our virtual machine profile is sort of the basest of the base. We use virtual machine profiles all the time in our labs, but if you're not using virtual machine profiles, then you would need to go up to the next level, which is the lab profile save as. But if I want to make a copy of this virtual machine profile, I can do so, and I can put it wherever I need to put it. All right, so I am all of the save as features are located inside of our edit page. So here I am on the virtual machine profile. I'm going to click on edit, and here I am with my all of the basics that we have for a virtual machine profile. How many processors, how much RAM, my network adapter, hard disks, so on and so forth. Now, here's what I was talking about before. Save as is just a feature of edit. So if I just scroll down on my basic information, I can do a save as. Now, when I do a save as for a virtual machine profile, all I got to do is give it a name. So I'm going to call this Brian's saved example. That's all I'm going to do. Just give it a new name and click on OK. Now, this is a slightly weird or it can be slightly jarring for new lab developers. Notice that I am taken to a new edit page. I was just on an edit page, but I'm on a different edit page. So now any changes I make here are being made to that copy. So like if I wanted to make it have more RAM or something like that, I could do that here and then click on save. I don't need to click on save as. I already am on my virtual machine profile. But if I don't need to make any changes, I just want to have this copy out here, I just go ahead and click on save. I give it a note. I created a gold copy of my VM, click on OK. And here we are. Notice this is not in use by any lab profiles or lab series. Now, if I wanted to, I could go in and I could, just for example, go into a lab profile and I can edit that profile and I can go to virtual machines and add a virtual machine. And if I take a look here, here is Brian's saved example. I could click on that and add it. And there it is. It's in. I would then connect it to my external network and boom, it's ready to go inside of this lab profile. So once I have this virtual machine out there, I can use that inside of lab profiles. But once I do that, once I use that copy or that save as, it now becomes a part of that lab profile. So any changes that are made are going to be changed whenever that lab profile is used. Okay. All right. So let me go ahead and cancel that. So that was an example of how we save a virtual machine profile using save as. Now let's switch out to the lab series. Remember, the lab series has a couple of options. So we're going to take a look at a couple of these options really quick. All right. So we're on our lab profile page, and on our lab profile page, we click on Edit Lab Profile. Once again, on our Basic Information tab, if we scroll down, notice it's a button now. We don't have just a link with an icon, it's an actual button. So we go ahead and click on Save As. And now we have to provide a little bit more information. First of all, we have to give it a number. So I am going to call this number, this is a lab profile, not a lab series. So I'm going to call this, we'll call it module 01. And then we have to give the lab profile, remember this is a profile, not a series or a virtual machine. We have to give it a name. So I'm going to call this a webinar sample lab profile. Then I can also choose a new lab series and choose a new organization. So I'm going to do this as an example of how we would make something be available to production. So I'm going to go ahead and choose a new series. I'll do a search, And you can see here, I have 2 series. Excuse me, had to clear my throat there. We have 2 lab series here. One is for our development environment and one is for our production environment. So we're currently working in our development environment. I'm going to put this new lab profile that I'm going to create by doing a save as, and I'm going to put it in our production environment. I'm going to click on OK. And then I'm also going to change my organization, which right now this belongs to the development organization. And I'm going to choose it and I'm going to do a search. And you'll see here that I've got my parent organization, which doesn't actually do any labs. It's just used for user accounts. I have my development environment and I have my production organization. So I click on my production organization and OK. And now here are those 3 options. Notice our default is to create a new lab, a new virtual machine profiles based on the ones in this lab, or clone them. This is what I was talking about, is your most commonly used. So I'm going to go ahead and do this, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to do another one, but this time I'm going to use inherit. So here's this one. Now, remember what I said about how we had our base level, which was the virtual machine profile, and now we're 1 level up. When we save as with the lab profile, any virtual machine profiles that are contained within that are also going to need to be saved. So we have to give them a new name. So I'm going to give them a completely new name. This is going to be our Windows 10 Brian sample for webinar. It's a really long name, but that's what that one is going to be. And this one is going to be sample uploaded Windows 10 machine. All right, now, normally you don't have them be quite as long named as this, but just bear with me here. So these are going to be immediately apparent when we go through our big long list. So I click on OK. And then all of a sudden it comes out. Now, notice we're not editing. We're not on a new edit page, right? So I would be able to launch this lab profile if I wanted to, but I am in my production environment. So when I go into my Brian sample series, if I click on edit here, you can see that I've got publish points out there. This lab series already has publishing. I have just taken a lab profile, put it into an already existing series. So now if I go out to use my LTI, or if I'm using API calls, or if I'm using, and we hope that you are, the Learn on Demand Systems TMS or training management system, all of those functionality, all of those activities are, or all of the things that you're setting up as activities can now link to this back-end system because we have just made it available. Of course, its development status has to be complete, but because we've just made a save as, and it was already marked as complete, it's came along for the ride. So that's how we do a clone. I'm going to go back to our original lab profile that we were at, and I'm going to edit the lab profile, and I'm going to go back down to save as, and this time we're going to do inherit. And so I'm going to call this module 2, or we'll call this, module 2, O2, and we'll call this inherit example. And once again, we're going to put it back into that production environment. So I'm going to take my sample series and I'm going to set my organization as the production series or production organization. But this time, instead of using clone, I'm going to use inherit and click on OK. Notice that when we're inheriting, we have to tell it what we're inheriting. Which virtual machines, which networks. Now I can pick and choose. So in this particular case, let's just take the Windows 10 participant and our external network. And I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And here is a brand new lab profile. But if I go in and edit this lab profile and go to my networks, notice it's just checkboxes. and same for my virtual machines. They're just checkboxes. I can't actually edit those here. But if I go into the original, and you see here that this lab profile is a child of this, I can go ahead and when I edit this lab profile, I can edit my networks and I can edit my virtual machines. So if I make any changes to the parent, the child gets those changes, just like I explained before. All right, now we talked about reuse sort of sparingly, only because again, that's a special use case. But if you do choose to reuse, you get the exact same dialog box that comes up for the inherit. You just choose which ones you're going to be getting. All right. All right. So we've covered the virtual machine profile. We've covered the lab profile. Now let's talk about our brand new feature, making a copy of a lab series. So you'll notice that I have several lab profiles here. Lots of them are marked as complete. Some are marked as in development. Those are lab profiles that are within my single lab series. If I go in and edit this lab series and go down to save as, once again, notice it's an icon with a link, not a button. Click on save as. Once again, I am given the opportunity to give it a new name. So we're going to call this webinar final production lab series. Okay. And once again, I'm going to put it into the production org, because that would be a perfect example of how you would use this. We're taking something that is a lab series, an entire lab series that's in a production org or in a development org, and we're going to put it to a new lab series in the production org. So I can pick and choose this list, but I have to know which ones I want and which ones I don't want. And remember that depending on how you do this, you may not be able to see. So make sure you know which of these you want to do. In most cases, you're going to want to do all of them, because a lab series that's going to be pushed over to production is going to be something that is already done. But you can also select none and then pick a specific set of examples. So for example, if I just want my my open lab and my participant, or part 01, and click on OK. Once again, we are taken to our lab series. So remember, the virtual machine profile, when we do a save as, takes you to a new edit page. Everything else takes you to the details page. Okay. But here we are inside of our production lab series. Now, in this lab series, you are going to notice that we lost our publishing points, and we also might need to set a little bit of extra information. So if I go in and add my publishing points here, which are the 2 APIs that I can publish to, and save, and click on OK. And then I can go down to my lab profiles. Please notice that all of my lab profiles and my virtual machine profiles all are here, and they all belong to my my production environment, my production organization. So if I go in to look at any one of these, I can go in here and I could click on launch, and I would be able to get all of my virtual machines and get everything exactly like I would in the original lab profile, which was in the original lab series. So that is a quick and easy way of getting an entire set of lab profiles, all the virtual machine profiles from those lab profiles into the correct location. All right, let's switch back to the slides here really quick. And let's talk about some resources we have for you. You can learn more about our save as features, and you can see here that we have one for lab series, one for lab profile, and one for virtual machine profile. If you want to check those out, you start with LODS.ONE and then /, And then for lab series, it's clone lab series. For lab profile, it's clone lab profile. And then for virtual machine profile save as, it's part of VM profiles. If you want to get a little bit more training and learn on demand systems and our professional services team, you can join us next Thursday, April 15th. We will be doing the supporting the learning journey with skills validation. It is a great half hour of information about using skills validation, and there's lots of good examples there. You can check that out and get more information, sign up for it, and also view some of the previous demos. You can check that out at lods.1/feature demos, all one word, no space. And then if you want an even deeper dive, our next lab developer workshop is coming soon, Thursday, April 29th, taking your labs to the next level, all sorts of tips and tricks and things that you can do, including how to use save as and when to use it. That is going to be at lods.1/workshop. And with that, I wanted to thank you for your time and your attendance today. And if you have any questions, feel free to type those questions in. Otherwise, I will wish you a good day and hope to see you at the next upcoming webinar.